Hey guys, Inksmith here, and today I'm doing a downfall video, but I want to start it out a little bit different than I do with most of my videos. I usually begin with an origin story about the creator and what happened to them over their life. With this one, I first want to kind of explain some context and let you know about who this person is, and that also I don't want you to place them into the leagues of some of the other downfall videos I've done in the past. Like, for example, Arcadum was another dungeon master who fell quite a bit, and he was in multiple sexual allegation cases, and Adam Koebel is nowhere near as bad as Arcadum. So I don't want you to place him anywhere near one of these people who like went down the ladder of addiction, drugs, alcohol, sexual abuse, all that type of stuff. He made a very bad call in a game that he was hosting. Now, when I say a game that he was hosting, maybe some of you don't know what a tabletop role-playing game is. So let me give you a short description of what Adam's job was and what the game was that he was running. Adam Koebel is the creator of a role-playing system known as Dungeon World. Dungeon World is very similar to Dungeons and Dragons. That's probably one that almost everybody knows. If you don't know what I'm talking about when I say a tabletop RPG, that is a role-playing game where you literally play the role, like as in act out the role of your character in front of other people. You make your character on a sheet called a character sheet. It can be anything from like a female elf to a princess barbarian to a male human knight. It doesn't matter. There's a lot of choices. This game in particular had a fantasy setting and a sci-fi setting you could use. They were using some sort of sci-fi setting at the time that had synthetic humans in it, or robo-humans, if you will. And they were in a world known as Dungeon World, which is pretty much, I guess, the most simplistic explanation I can make. A world that has tons of dungeons in it, that you just have so many dungeons in this world that people make a living by looting dungeons over and over again. And in between those dungeon looting sessions, which they would roleplay fighting tons of monsters, and by fighting, I mean you like roll dice to see if you've hit or not hit the monster. It's kind of like a board game in that sense. Then they would come back and they would have interactions in town. And the interactions within town is usually where characters repair themselves, they repair their armor, they heal up their wounds, they buy new weapons, they resupply their food and healing potions, kind of like you would in the game Diablo. So that's a very, very simplistic idea of what a tabletop role-playing game is. And this is all done via verbal accounts of what's going on. The only thing that is not verbal is usually dice rolls, which are for statistics, attributes, and traits. So for example, if you have a strength of 18, that's a really high strength. So 18 or below on a 20-sided dice means you successfully did something that used your strength, like lifted a rock up over your head. That's usually where the dungeon master would ask you to roll. Now, for this scene that we're about to talk about that Adam was involved in, this was just a town interaction, and role-played scenes are completely made up by the dungeon master and the character. And it's kind of like a fantasy dialogue, if you will. It's a role play like you might have seen in old forums in AOL or Prodigy Online. God, did anybody use Prodigy Online back then? My God, I'm showing my age. I mean, what's Prodigy Online? Never heard of it. What I'm going to read today is kind of a funny story. Funny in the sense that the way the person has told it is a little more comedic, because it's called The Tragic Ballad of Adam Koebel, the Fallen Paladin of Social Justice, written by Delencio 11 months ago on Reddit. And that's about how long ago this all went down. Gather around, boys and girls, and those who fit either both or neither categories. And let me tell you a story. It is a story of the rise and fall of the anger and disappointment and much of the Twitter angst. It is a tale of one of the swiftest and most thorough career deaths in the history of tabletop gaming. It is the tale of Adam Koebel. As a content warning, if you're not comfortable with descriptions of fictional, non-human sexual assault, this is not the story for you. As an author warning, I will tell you right now, I'll be doing my best to focus on the facts, but there is only so much one can do. I will not pretend to actually be an impartial observer. Feel free to seek out other versions of events after reading this if you want. Some background. I assume most people are familiar at least with the basic idea of tabletop RPGs. But if you aren't, here's a summary. Tabletop RPGs are basically make-believe with rules. People sit around a table, create a character, and then go on merry adventures. Making said world is the task arguably the most important player, the Game Master, Dungeon Master for D&D. He makes the world, controls the people, and how the players interact with it. Basically, everything that isn't controlled by other players. People play RPGs to have a good time with friends, but unfortunately, sometimes things don't work out that way. Chapter 1: The Rise of Sir Adam Koebel. Now that the basic context is out of the way, let us introduce the protagonists of our sad tale. At this point, I need to put a disclaimer. I didn't particularly follow Adam Koebel before the actual events of our story, barring watching a few streams he was part of. And this section will remain short and sort of vague because they're essentially what I pieced together and pieced together from what I knew of him and found online. Mr. Koebel first came to public attention with the release of Dungeon World in 2012, a narrative rules light system he co-created based on the Apocalypse world, and hit the ground running from there. The system was a hit, and he managed to successfully leverage the exposure it gave him to establish himself solidly in the RPG online community. He started running live games on Twitch in 2014 for Itame JP, a relatively famous RPG YouTuber, and in 2015 became the DM in residence at Roll20, the biggest online virtual tabletop service. Adam Koebel had ascended. This level of success came from several things. First, of course, was the street cred that of being co-author of Dungeon World gave him, but was only the first step. From there, he built up his name as the representative of the growing socially conscious side of RPGs. He was the very public spearhead against the white, male-dominated RPG scene, and actively promoted player agency at the table, better inclusiveness of racial/sexual/other minorities, consent tools, and RPGs as a safe space. Remember, this becomes incredibly important later. Chapter 2: Cloak and Daggers. So, since posting this thread, a member of the community came forward and made me aware of something I didn't know about Adam's rise to power. It's not strictly related to the actual drama, but it did add a layer on top of it, since it all came together after relevant events, so I'm adding it in. Some context. Before there was one GM on Itame JP's roleplay, there were three. These were Steve Lumpkin, Neil Erickson, and of course Adam Koebel. At the time, the channel was still small, and verbal agreements between the GMs and the channel were that what held them together. As the channel grew into one of the biggest RPG-related franchises on the net, however, JP decided that it was time to replace these with formal contracts, which the GM decided were wildly unfair, and banded together to negotiate better contracts as a group. They chose Adam as their representative in negotiations with JP. The result of this negotiation meeting was that Steven and Neil were cut out of any roleplay work, and Adam became roleplay's sole GM. Steven and Neil's series were canceled, and they were shown the door. This was a massive shock at the time to fans, and the full details didn't emerge for years, basically until roleplay got canceled. But that comes on later in our story, with both Neil and Steven stepping away on the face of it willingly because they had other quote-unquote commitments. From then on, roleplay was the Adam Show. He ran every series and was the sole IP creator working with roleplay. Here are some sources about the whole thing from Neil and Steve. Read those if you want in the notes below on my video. Chapter 3: Non-Consensual Robo-Orgasm. As of early 2020, Adam Koebel was at the pinnacle of his prestige. His persona had been firmly cemented. He had a large following of very dedicated fans who subscribed to his ideas regarding inclusivity and consent in RPGs, and he was in a bunch of stuff online, including more live stream games. Nothing could have gone wrong for him. Enter Far Verona Season 2, Episode 18. This clip is not for the faint of heart. Even if a description of sexual assault doesn't bother you, the sheer mortifying train wreck in progress likely will. Here is that clip.
Smiles and he says, I got to tell you. And as he's talking, he's again very like delicately taking pieces out of his toolkit and stuff, and he's setting them on the table, getting ready to like fix you. And he looks at you and he says, "You know, I got to be honest. The first time you came in here, I couldn't stop staring. Just so beautiful."
Thanks. You know, I don't really get called beautiful a lot. I guess I
When you
just,
say he shakes his head, he says, "That's crazy," and he steps over to you and he puts his hand on your face, like the back of his fingers, like on your face, and he says, "You really are. You're just about perfect." And he's standing like 2 inches away from you now, with like his fingers on your face, smiling slightly.
thanks, buddy. I really appreciate it. That really makes me feel great. Um, can you maybe like, I'm just gonna take like a step back here. Just a step.
Yeah, so he pulls his hand away and shakes his head and he's like, "Yeah, shit. So I just I just thought maybe you know uh I'm just running my mouth. I don't know. Don't never mind." And he like turns and he knocks a wrench off the table and he's like, shit. And he like kneels down to get it and you see him and I think you hear him and he puts his hand on his head as he's like going to pick the thing up and he's just like, "Stupid Rocket, come on, what are you doing?" And he gets back
Johnny
up and he's just
doesn't
like,
have
and
the
you can see
I
him,
don't
he's
think
trembling.
I don't think he has the ability to recognize like he has been hit on before, but I'm not sure if he was ever
I
programmed
imagine
to
lots of
Yeah.
drunk like housewives
lots
whose
of drunk
husbands
people.
abandon them who are just like,
Yeah.
"Oh,
I don't think
Johnny, you're so
he's ever
handsome."
yeah, I don't think he's ever been programmed to respond like romantically
Recognize.
or recognize
Mm.
attraction, right? I don't think he's ever
But
yeah,
as a counterpoint, you are also not programmed to drive a car, Johnny.
that's so
Today is a day
true.
of exciting
That's
new
so true.
feelings.
So I think he can see that this person wanted to display like affection or have like a tender moment. So he goes over to him and he kind of like puts his hand on his back and
You feel him like freeze
Hey,
up a little, like, "Oh God."
hey, listen. I am open to new adventures. So I don't want you to feel weird about anything, but I think it's kind of like when you have a glass of water and you're not really thirsty, you just kind of drink it, you know what I mean? Does that make
And he,
sense?
so yeah, he's standing up and he says to you, he's like, his eyes are like wide. You can see him like almost like tearing up a little with like, "Oh God, it's happening." And he says to you, he's like, "Don't be scared. I've done it before. I can show you." And
All
he
right.
reaches over onto the table and he picks up some kind of like device, right? It's got a plug on one end and some buttons on the handle. And he says, I'm gonna do it real gentle the first time and you tell me how it feels, okay?" And
Okay, sure.
he says there's a port in the back of your neck. You can feel it. And he gently like he puts his hands up like you're a scared animal. He's like, let me just, and he reaches up to touch it, right? And you can
Okay.
feel it. There's a port back there. And it's like, as far as you know, it's like a firmware update port. It's hidden at the base of your skull. You don't remember, like it's never been accessed while you are conscious. So he reaches up, you can feel it, and he holds up the device, and you can see that the prongs on the thing match the feeling of the plug. And he says, "I'm just a little at first, okay?"
Okay, sure.
And
Johnny has no idea
smiling
what this guy's about
slightly,
to do. No idea what
trembling
this
a
guy's gonna
little,
do.
he places the edge of the device against the port and he presses a button. And Johnny has, for the first time in his entire life, whatever the equivalent of a robot orgasm, right there. It hits you like a truck. Your whole system just like lights up with like positive experience indicators, and your vision like flickers and blurs. Your temperature sensors all go haywire for just a second. Your knees buckle slightly, And I think maybe that's the last shot. I think that's the shot of the episode is Johnny getting his brain stimulated
Wow.
by this sexy mechanic.
What a ride it's been.
I feel like this is where Johnny should shout for help. He's just been violated.
Yes, please. Let me
Listen.
kill this creep.
Robots need love too. All right.
But
That's all I'm
but
saying.
he didn't. He thought he was gonna fix him.
Yeah, well,
Not
you know.
not give an orgasm. Jesus Christ.
That's right. We have to start every episode with an explosion. So,
Okay. All right. So that happened, I guess.
yeah. So we can talk more about that at the beginning of the next
Great.
episode. For now, though, let's hand out some experience points.
So basically, Adam Koebel was GMing a game on Twitch with some hundreds of viewers when one of the characters, a robotic bartender named Johnny, played by Elspeth Eastman, a woman, this is relevant later, just wait, went to see a friend for repairs and upgrades. To cut a long story short, the character of the mechanic controlled by Koebel violated Johnny by forcing an orgasm upon him without permission. If you look at the players during the clip, you can see the horror and unease dawning on their faces as the situation unfolds, even as Adam keeps giggling his way through the description of a non-consensual sexual assault on one of the characters. Though I couldn't find an archive of the live chat, it was in a very similar state to the players: bafflement, unease, disgust. By the end of the scene, poor Johnny never gets a chance to prevent or fight back against sexual assault, since he has no idea what's going to happen until it happens, and the session ends right afterwards. During the post-session discussion, a laughing Koebel responds to Johnny's horrified player that robots need love too. To fully grasp the magnitude of what has just happened, let's review a few things. Adam Koebel, the well-known face of consent promotion in safe spaces in tabletop RPGs, as a male GM, plays out what is clearly a pre-planned scene of non-consensual sexual assault on one of the female players' characters, a player who is, by the way, a survivor of sexual assault in front of a live audience of hundreds. No agency is given to the player at no point before or during the scene. Does Koebel make sure his players, especially the character's player, are fine with this? And on top of that, he appears intensely amused by the sexual assault he is orchestrating in his game, even gloating about it afterwards. Nothing good could come out of this. Chapter 4. Things Go Poorly. Within a week, the show was put on indefinite hiatus in an official video on March 31st. On the segment, Koebel blamed a poor implementation of consent tools such as the X card. We'll talk about that one later, which he himself had actively and vocally championed in the past, and stated that they should have been better discussed and implemented as a group. This evasive and blame-shifting explanation did not sit well with Elspeth Eastman, the player in question, who released a video with her own statement.
I've been thinking about what to say since it happened. Since my character, Johnny Collins, a very old synthetic bartender, was in this scene, I wanted to give my thoughts on the situation and how it affected me as a player. And yes, I wrote all this out because I'd like to be as clear and understood as possible. There is a trigger warning for sexual assault here, just so that you're aware. In the last episode of Far Verona, my character Johnny takes the group to a mechanic named Rocket, where Johnny states that he's been several times. This is the first time we, the audience, and the players have met this character. Johnny, however, trusts the people and the synths here, saying that he's gone here before to get fixed or patched up. In the last few scenes, my character is asked by Adam's character if he'll join him in the back room. Vanna's character Haley stops Johnny and says something like, "How about I come with you? We don't know this guy." Adam's character bristles at this because he doesn't want Vanna's character joining himself and Johnny. Johnny says it's going to be okay. This is a good guy. He's been here before, etc. And then Johnny and Haley establish a safe word, which is just help. So since Johnny and the rest of the cast had gotten hurt from an explosion earlier, Johnny gets back there thinking, cool, I'm going to get patched up and be on my way like before. Instead, Adam decides that's somehow the perfect time for his NPC Rocket to start hitting on Johnny. Johnny backs up because he doesn't know what Rocket is doing. Then seeing Rocket's disappointment, he says, hey, I'm down for new adventures. What does that mean to Johnny? Definitely not what happened next, which was getting an orgasm plugged into his sockets with some device that Rocket claims he's used many times. The kicker here is that before the episode, Adam wanted to know more about story arcs that I envisioned for Johnny. I said he definitely wanted upgrades to get rid of that bit crusher on his voice. We wanted to know more about the bartender who replaced Johnny. And specifically, I wanted Johnny to be able to say no to more people, including his friends. The way the episode ended was Johnny laying down willingly and then having this completely alien sensation happen. He was expecting upgrades. He barely has the concept of romance. Then Adam ends the episode there, leaving no room for Johnny to refuse or even just punch Rocket for violating his space. It felt very premeditated, and I was shocked and angry. After everything went down and people were expressing their discomfort, I messaged Adam saying that this was not what I envisioned for Johnny. He apologized for misreading my intent. I'm not sure how one could misread the intent to get fixed up as, let's give this guy an orgasm, but it happened despite the red flags anyway. I lost faith and trust in Adam as a GM, even after role-playing with him before. Hell, I might have even lost faith in him as a friend. Adam continues to say that the game mechanics were not properly in place and that as a group, we should have discussed this prior to starting the show. Sure, that's a good idea in hindsight, but if you need to have a talk with your cast beforehand that you're planning on introducing a sexual predator NPC to one of their characters, I guarantee you, not one person would be okay with that, especially not in front of hundreds of people. This isn't a question about what could have prevented it when Adam is literally the one in charge. After rewatching the episode multiple times, I was no longer open to having my character or my name tied to the story, so I quit. And that's it. The rest of the cast and the production team of Far Verona continue to be wonderful people who I look forward to working with in the future. For now, these are my thoughts and feelings on the matter. To all the fans of the show and of Johnny, I thank you for watching, and thanks for hearing me out. Stay safe, stay healthy, peace.
Afterwards, she stated she was quitting the show and expressed her dissatisfaction with his apology both in private to her and in public. In response, Adam released an official apology on Twitter the next day.
The big thing here, I think, for me is recognizing that these kinds of situations can be avoided by implementing the right protocols. And for me, the biggest takeaway is that I wanted to apologize specifically for missing that integral step, right? Normally, it's something that we do at the beginning of a campaign. We talk about themes, we talk about lines and veils, we talk about safety protocols, but we didn't for Far Verona. And that's something that I regret. I regret missing that point. It's something that we usually do, and it just didn't happen. And this is the result. So for our existing shows, for Court of Swords and for other shows that we do going forward, we're rededicating ourselves to the safety of everybody at the table. That includes me and the other players. We're going to be instituting the X card or a similar mechanism to help prevent in the moment discomfort rather than just assuming that we can deal with it off screen on a break or after the episode, right? It's going to allow us to continue telling the kinds of sometimes intense and sometimes difficult stories that we tell on roleplay, but in a way that is safer for everybody involved.
Bear in mind that at this point, it's been over 10 days since the actual incident, and those 10 days have been filled with constant backlash against him, especially after the video he made on the cancellation of Far Verona. At this point, the apology is coming very late, only coming out at all because of the backlash. Some might say that was the main reason for his apology, and it's still kind of lackluster. While he does take responsibility and apologize, he doesn't ever actually address the fact that he thought it would be okay to run sexual assault scenes in a bar against an evasive half sentence, instead saying that he made a quote-unquote mistake and blaming his own internalized issues. It is worth noting that throughout this whole mess, his core fan base has never ceased supporting him. Some see this, in fact, proof that he didn't go too far, or wasn't so bad after all, while others interpret it as Koebel cultivating a fan base where he can do no wrong, and where his celebrity acts of get-out-of-jail-free card work all the time. I will let you make up your own mind on this one. Chapter 5. The Cancellation of Good Sir Koebel. At this point, Koebel disappears from the internet for 2 months, until May 31st. There is no word from him anywhere, until a post appears on his Twitter timeline in response to BLM and the George Floyd killing. However, some like Jaron Johnson, creator of Monsters of America, accused him of attempting to take advantage of a situation such as this as means of squeaking his face back into people's timelines in a positive light. Koebel disappears again for a week, and then he publishes an article called Moving on his personal blog, headlined by a picture of him looking sorrowfully away from the camera. It's the longest thing he's said to date on the topic, bearing the non-apology video. So it's his opportunity to once and for all lay to rest the story by properly, unambiguously, and fully apologizing for his behavior. Instead, he spends 3 long paragraphs explaining that it was scary and difficult to be a celebrity online before finally stating that he made a quote-unquote mistake. He spends a single paragraph on the mistake, remaining vague, never spelling out what the mistake actually was, and attributed it to the unrehearsed and spontaneous nature of Twitch. He closes out the only section about his quote-unquote mistake, saying that in role-playing, players work together to create an improvised narrative. In general, this came across as just more evasive blame shifting than actually owning up to what he did, especially in light of what follows in the next 7 long paragraphs of the blog. However, he follows that up by essentially playing the victim, saying that because of the angry voices online, quote unquote, he got deplatformed for his mistake. Because of his very hateful reaction from the haters, he could no longer, quote unquote, take creative risks, and he now feels unsafe. To cut the rest of his statement short, he basically said he was excited to move on to other things, saying that he now feels liberated from a life online, and that he's happy there are people who like what he makes. He closed out this whole thing saying that he felt loss, grief, and sadness, not for what he did, but for what it cost him. So what now? Since the statement, he's published exactly 3 tweets. The first was a promotion of his new blog post on GMing. The responses were split between the fans happy to see him producing content again, and the others who called him out for going against his own statement of intent, stepping back from the hobby and from online presence a mere 3 weeks after releasing quote-unquote moving on, the paragraph and sentence about what happened to him. The second was a post about his resignation from a Dune RPG, along with the removal of all his work from it. And finally, a 1-sentence post telling his fans to buy a product released by another creator, with replies turned off. Chapter 6. The Bard chooses the right time to post. This is an extra part added on to the story, and I'll just read it, and I'm not sure how well it's going to be congruent with the rest of what I've just read. So this might go against Rule 13, as it literally just happened yesterday/today, but I will add it as an appendix to the whole sorted story rather than its focus. If one of the mod disagrees with this assessment, I will remove it. Let's talk a bit more about that 1-sentence post telling his fans to buy his product. I mentioned at the end of Chapter 4, the product in question was The Perfect RPG, an ongoing Kickstarter that got canceled at $11,398 out of its $6,200 goal. Why did it get canceled, you may ask? Well, things get interesting real fast if you look just a bit deeper. The project was a collaborative one, with a long list of contributors that has since been entirely removed from the project page. However, they included Sage Latora, the other co-writer of Dungeon World, and many more. Many of them backed out of this project. Why? Because Adam Koebel was in it, and they had no idea. This is where things get a bit weird. Koebel's name wasn't on the cover mock-up, which you may note has a list of contributors in alphabetical order at the back. But Then, the actual list on the campaign page, the same since it has been removed, had contributors presented in reversed alphabetical order by given name, which had the consequence of putting Adam Koebel at the very bottom. Basically, Koebel catfished his way into a project with other big names in the industry, as people were quietly or not quietly pulling out of the project due to Koebel's involvement in it. The creator, Luke Crane, scrapped the fully funded Kickstarter campaign rather than remove the problematic element from the list. Some in the Kickstarter backer comments pointed out that the whole project was probably intended as some weird gotcha statement about cancel culture, which would fit with Adam's relative silence on the matter. His game named after his apology to the live stream sexual assault saga and the project tagline of the quote-unquote quest for perfection. Whatever it may have been, it failed to let Koebel worm his way back into the RPG scene, and as a result, he deleted his Twitter account, which was the source of much confusion and consternation for your poor bard when he found out. To close out this section, I will simply quote one of the commenters in the thread. I guess these answers the question of, has Adam Koebel gotten any better about consent? Epilogue. Good night, sweet prince. And that's just about the last to be written about the sad tale of good Sir Koebel, who was once the icon of social awareness in the RPG community, and who will now never work in it again without a pseudonym for failing to follow his own teachings. I tried to give this as thorough of a timeline as I could, but there are plenty of things I just couldn't fit, such as accounts by two of his exes about what being in a relationship with the man was like, the common point between the two being accusations of gaslighting and generally not respecting their boundaries. I might also have missed something due to simply not having been able to find everything online. This is, to my knowledge, the first post that really tries to piece the drama from start to finish, for those who didn't follow it. Above all, however, your humble bard confesses to being unable to remain entirely impartial to the story he has told to you. While the event itself was disturbing to watch, and says some pretty poor things about the character of the person who allowed it to happen, a swift and thorough apology would have been enough in my eyes. Instead, as it is probably apparent, I find myself immensely finding sleaziness in Koebel, which was never properly addressed. The fact that he ran a non-consensual sexual assault scene, which he immediately afterwards gloated about to his mortified players, and instead tried to subvert his own apology down the line by playing the victim, minimizing the harm he caused by playing it off as a mere quote-unquote mistake, and to the bitter end by trying to shift blame away from himself. To me, this whole response felt like a failed attempt at remaining in the limelight, rather than one step away from it being claimed. It also paints a fairly negative light over all the things he defended online. Can he really have believed that he was saying all this stuff about consent and inclusivity when he himself flagrantly disregarded the consent and made a female survivor of sexual assault relive a similar scene at his table, giggling all the while? Can we really take his messages of responsibility and awareness as honest when he has shown such a clear lack of either in his own case? These are open questions to you, my dear audience. My answer is already found. Today, Koebel remains relatively in a low profile, his RPG comeback having been met with backlash. He now focuses on his Instagram account with a changed username, where he regularly posts his artistic photos to the admiring comments of his fans. His final YouTube videos comment section reads like the memorial of a fallen hero. And his final tweets had a massive skew in favor of those saying they missed him and that Adam did nothing wrong. Perhaps this is merely the slumber of the beast, who will one day, when the community has finally moved on, attempt his triumphant return, much like Napoleon returning from exile on the Isle of Elba. Your humble bard merely hopes that such a return meets the same fate for the fallen paladin of social justice. So there you have it, folks. That is what was written about r/hobby drama. And this is a section where people talk about stuff that went down in their role play sessions. And I think This guy, the author who wrote this whole thing, whose name was D'Alencio, did an amazing job, and I want to say thank you to him for writing this very long addressment of what exactly went down with Adam Koebel. Now, let me get into a few words of my own about the situation. Well, here guys, I'm gonna take a step away from the script as I do sometimes and actually just speak openly, as being a dungeon master or a game master, if you will, is something I'm very familiar with. This is actually something I've done since I was in 8th grade and like 13 years old. So I've been doing this for a long time. Now, I don't work as a dungeon master or anything anymore. I don't run any more games. I just don't have time or the needed quietness at my house with 2 little kids running around, so I don't host games anymore, but I still do art, and I'm even showing right now some of the art I've done in the past for very old books and very old style Dungeons and Dragons games. And God, my take on this is a rough one, because I see what Adam was doing, and I see a lot of huge mistakes and red flags that I feel like if you are an experienced dungeon master and someone who does this professionally, he should have taken these into account. And that's what kind of blows my mind, because I did it as an amateur since I was 13, and I have a feeling Adam's no different from me. I have a feeling from the second that he could read, he was into fantasy stuff. I was reading those Dragonlance novels about the red dragons and the black dragons all the way back in like 6th grade, I think. As soon as I could reach for those novels on the bookstore at Walden Books, I would start filing through those right away and got really into like fantasy type settings. So I know he's got a massive passion for it, but he's also somebody who has a massive passion for left-leaning SJW values, which I was kind of surprised to see him not abide by the own rules that he had talked about before in the past of creating a safe space within gaming. He talked about this thing in the past called a protocol that was known as the X card. The X card means while you're playing a game of Dungeons and Dragons, you randomly send messages to the dungeon master via like slips of papers and stuff like that. That's so that you can do something maybe sort of underhanded, secretly, not tell somebody else in the group. And in modern day play, you might send them a DM via whatever, I guess, hosting service you're using, like roll20.org or something like that. And his idea with the X card is that when something gets too, I don't want to always say intimate, it can even be like violent or scary for a player, they can send him an X card, and that X card means stop, you're going too far with this. I remember the first time I actually heard about using something like this was in the game Oblivion, Wraith the Oblivion, which was the World of Darkness. And if you don't know World of Darkness books, those are really heavily like into romance and intimate situations, because it's all about like this dark, seedy underworld of vampires and werewolves. And even they had a bunch of rules about how to make sure you didn't get out of hand with getting too sexual with players, I guess is the only way I can say it. My policy was always this though. I never thought an X card would work. My reason for that is I always felt like an X card would be something that the person who was most uncomfortable in the group would use to tell you they were uncomfortable. But if that person was the most uncomfortable, usually they were the most introverted. If they were the most introverted, they were the least likely person to speak up and say that they were uncomfortable. So putting that on them to do as their job to tell you when they themselves, a person who can barely speak up and is already fighting with how comfortable they are with a new group, has to make a sudden leap forward and be like, wait, stop the game. Like, I don't see that happening. That doesn't seem like it would be the first reaction of an introverted person or somebody very uncomfortable with the situation. What most people do in those kind of situations is they laugh nervously. They give you like awkward smiles. They don't know what to do. And if you look at the players within this scenario, you'll see them doing those same actions. They really don't know how to respond. And in general, we as role players, we as dungeon masters, we as role-playing tabletop gamers tend to be somewhat introverted. We know this hobby isn't for everybody. I wouldn't put it on the level of like we keep it a secret, but I would say like we don't talk about it to people who aren't really interested, because it doesn't really make a lot of sense. I remember trying to explain these games to my parents and them just being like, so is there like a movie you guys watch before you play to explain everything? Is there? Like, how do you hook it up to your TV? And I'd be like, oh no, this is not, this is not explainable to my parents. And they were also from like a Catholic background, so it was seen as a bit taboo to play this game during my early years too. So probably one of the rebellious things that drove me on to learn how to play it. Anyway, when you're playing with new players, I feel like it's best to keep things like sex and intimacy and romance off the table, because if you think about watching a movie with new friends the very first time, you probably don't want to watch torture porn for your first movie with your new friends. If you want to hang out with them, probably an action movie is okay. Probably even maybe a violent movie like, say, 300 would be okay to watch with a new group of people, because violence in general is almost comedic the way it's portrayed in movies. There's, you know, people stomped out and shot and they keep walking, and it's not very realistic. But sex, on the other hand, I don't know, man. It gets pretty steamy and pretty realistic in movies and can make a lot of people uncomfortable, as it's something we do in private. Violence is something we see on the TV every day, and it's something that is exploited by both our media, our news, and our television shows and movies we watch all the time. And that's because it's been almost done to a sort of exaggerated state. And I think most of us realize that, you know, none of this is very realistic. And that's something within the fantasy world that can get even more unrealistic. Now, some people might say, well, this sex scene that was involved with Adam Koebel and his players was very unrealistic. There's no such thing as robots that have USB drives that download an orgasm into them. Yeah, you're right, but nonetheless, it was something that was sexual. And while violence is out in the open and usually something accepted across multiple mediums and comfortable to be able to be watched amongst friends and family, sex, not so much. That's because sex has always been considered a very private thing. No one ever says, can you please close the door? I need to shoot someone right now. Like, you know, you never walked in on your parents shooting each other. Okay, sorry, I'm cracking myself up with these analogies. Walked in on your parents shooting each other or karate chopping each other's face. I don't know, maybe you did. Maybe you had a really rough upbringing. Sorry, I'm losing my mind here. I got to get back on topic. Look, I'm not trying to make light of this situation, although it is kind of silly in the sense that it was a robot having an orgasm downloaded into it. And I think what Adam should have done is had a talk beforehand and let them know what kind of setting he was going to put them in. And if some people say, well, like, oh, you don't really know what you're going to do until the game starts to play. Adam Koebel is the creator of the setting that they were playing. He's literally the person who wrote the book on Dungeon World, and that was their setting. Dungeon World is almost like Dungeons and Dragons. And he knows every little bit about what could possibly happen. If he was going to include a character in there that was going to be somewhat pervy or predatory, then he needed to talk to his players about that beforehand. For example, I remember with Wraith the Oblivion, there was a part I was going to add to a game that had a lot of spiders in it. I knew one of my players had arachnophobia. So I sat them down and I talked to them about it before, and I said, now this one's going to have like a goddess in it, Lilith, who is like the spider queen. And there's going to be a part probably, if you go into the wrong area, there's going to be tons of spiders involved. Are you okay with that if I'm describing like spindly legs and spiders crawling all over? And they're like, yeah, I'll just tell you if like it gets too scary, and then I'll tell you stop. But for the most part, unless I see a visualization, I'm usually okay. And we went through the roleplay session and everyone was fine. Now, sex on the other hand, if I was going to include that, I honestly would probably only do it with friends I had known since like kindergarten, because I would know how dirty or raunchy I could be with my jokes with them. I would know what would be pushing the limits. I would know who their friends and family were, and I would know if I was breaking any sort of trauma from their past and, you know, unsettling them. Like, how does he not know this situation that happened to her character didn't happen to her somewhat in real life? For example, my friend who didn't like spiders just didn't have a good experience with spiders in their life. They had an infestation in their bathroom one time that really creeped them out to go to the bathroom at nighttime. And so they were like permanently scared from spiders. So I knew to ask them beforehand, are spiders in my game gonna be okay? If you don't know those kind of things and you don't want to ask those kind of questions, like what are your past traumas? Then don't put them in there. Don't take a risk. It's simple as that. And I think that's where Adam kind of really dropped the ball here. Also, another aspect of this, I feel like he should have just come out and made an apology. There's a lot of talk of we didn't set up protocol properly. I didn't think we checked before the game properly. I think we should have maybe put more stuff. I'm sorry that this happened. Don't say I'm sorry that this happened, because that makes it sound like this is the problem, not you are the problem. You made a mistake, bro. It's okay, man. Just come out and admit your mistake. Have like a, a bit of a breakdown on stream. Say like, dude, I can't believe how much I effed up this game and how much I stopped the enjoyment for these players. That one girl who made her comment was obviously quite upset. You definitely upset her. And if you drove a person to a point that they made that kind of acknowledgement of being upset that they wanted to leave your game, like I've never had a player leave a game. And if you've driven somebody to that point, it's time to come out and be like, look, I effed up. I screwed up so bad. I am so sorry. Like, I don't know what I was thinking. That was really stupid that I didn't take you guys aside beforehand and say, look, this is going to get kind of raunchy and wild. Are you guys okay with that? I don't know what I was thinking. It was stupid. It was totally my fault. I set up the scenario. I made the world. I'm the creator of the Dungeon World book. I'm the main DM. I should have known every in and out, and I've been doing this for years. I should have been more professional beforehand and after, and now all I can do is say I'm sorry, and I will try to correct my behavior in the future for new players that come into my game so that they're not uncomfortable. Anyway, guys, there you have it. The full story of where Adam Koebel is now and what happened in his past. I want to say thank you to the subscriber who actually mentioned Adam Koebel to me. I remember this story happening, but could not remember the details. So I want to say thank you. If you can post in the comments down below, I'll personally thank you. And I can even shout you out in a video if you want, but I couldn't remember exactly who recommended this to me, but it was on my Arcadum video. So thank you so much for that. This was a great idea and something I had completely forgotten from the past and had even watched the Destiny debate over this situation. So I wanted to comment on it myself. What do you guys think about this situation? Have you ever been in this kind of situation in a role-playing session? If you have, would you be willing to share like what went down? Some of these are very interesting to me because I feel like the dynamics of a social interaction within a role-play session can be very tricky, and I think you can get yourself in some sort of bad situations. You need to be careful. Anyway, guys, that's my take on the Adam Koebel situation. I have been the Inksmith, and I will talk to you again real soon.